Thank y'all. So I wanted to start off by just, telling you a little bit about my thoughts on cartographic process as consider myself a very amateur cartographer, and what the Southern Environmental Law Center does with maps. I think of, the cartographic process as this sort of, building and rebuilding of our maps until we really get what we want. And so sort of this is something I try and tell myself, and hopefully you'll humor me in this exercise, so repeat after me. I have made bad maps before. Thank you. I will again. And that's okay. So, more thoughts on process and creativity. This is my son Grayson. I found this on my phone and just sort of, it got wheels spinning for me about, how we get our ideas and where we get our ideas. For him, he was trying to do some sort of selfie picture with his teeth, his newly arrived teeth, which I had no idea of, and I was just scrolling through and I found these. And beyond that, here are some examples of just ways that I try and tuck these nuggets away for inspiration, be it a map that a 5-year-old has illustrated at my son's school, or a beautiful full moon. Keep track of these things that inspire you and let them feed your creativity. So the Southern Environmental Law Center, sort of our core mission, we believe that everyone in the region deserves to breathe clean air, to drink clean water, and to live in a healthy environment. As the SELC strengthens laws, we make government agencies do their job, and when necessary, we go to court to stop environmental abuses or to set far-reaching precedents. And so where does a geographer come into a law firm? Well, I try and explain the world to them. Here are the things you need to know about the cases that you're working on. And another way of doing that is I point to things and then I make maps so lawyers have something to point to when they're explaining, why a pollutant source is an issue for a local river. Mapping for advocacy is a fair but limited characterization of SELC's geospatial work. Our maps often must transcend the courts of public opinion and withstand the rigors of evidentiary scrutiny in the courts of law. But either way, they need to connect with environmental decision makers and to communicate a clear message. So what does this have to do with mapping or environmental law? This is a map of a neighborhood. Last night there was a shooting in this neighborhood, in this red area. Person shot died today, this morning. Their sister lives in this yellow house, and this white house is where I live. So, what does this have to do with mapping or environmental law? In my mind's eye, the processing of the murder that happened in my neighborhood last night, it connected this tragedy to a headline that I read yesterday, so bear with me. In North Carolina, hurricanes did what scientists could not: convince Republicans that climate change is real. I too found myself confronted with a reality that I did not want to believe. I thought violent crime was a past tense for my neighborhood. And so I found empathy in what is often a frustrating component of my work, and that's trying to communicate to those impacted by environmental issues, why it is important to do this. And climate change communication is very hard work. I've heard several people mention in talks during this conference that something to the extent of mapping climate change is one of the next great challenges for cartographers. And probably many of us have been asked to take that on in our jobs in one way or another. And so I use that sort of point that has been heavy on my mind today to make this connection to how this problem that we're confronted with problems that we often feel bigger than we may be able to try and solve. So what is the Southern Environmental Law Center doing in this effort to combat climate change? We're trying to find our place, honestly. So this is this is an example of a story map that we're building as a tool for our attorneys in-house. It won't be a public product, but the idea here is let's use our knowledge as geographers, myself, my colleague Miller I see here, and to pull together the best available information we have on floodplains, on the migration of marshes, on sea level rise, and to bring into that the sort of unique perspective that a law organization does, and that's sort of how permitting and development and many other components are going to, how we need to be reconsidering those things in the face of this information. And so this is really just a work in progress, but wanted to show it just as an example of sort of the process as something that is always ongoing. We've been working on this for 2 years and still not really feel like we're at a product that is useful yet, but we're getting there. Shifting on to a related topic, since we're here in right on the edge of the Atlantic coast, offshore drilling has been another issue that we've tackled. So what we see here is, and to give a little bit of context, every 5 years or so, the government releases a plan on where they will allow leasing for oil and gas offshore. The way that the Southern Environmental Law Center is involved in that is can be a little bit tricky, but we decided to take it on ourselves to do more of a communications campaign this time around it, leading up to through the draft planning process. So hopefully that we wouldn't get to a point where there was something we would be working on in terms of litigation later on. The problem is there's a ton of data on this map, and it's just it's not useful in the context that we were trying to do. And so this is the way we made it 3 years ago, and so we were going back to the drawing board to try and rethink that. And so we wanted to make some more focused print maps, because that's a very desirable product by the attorneys we work with, but we also wanted to make to open up that dense data into an interactive environment where people could, learn more about the components if they wanted to. So, I'll start with the print part. One of the things that we wanted to focus on, we were still stuck with this idea of a lot of information here, but one of the most important pieces that we wanted to communicate was about the right whale, North Atlantic right whales migratory corridor. And in the past, we had taken that as just a focus on the this purple swath here is the designated critical habitat. There are 2 designated critical habitats on the Atlantic coast. This is the calving grounds, and off the coast of New England, you have the the feeding grounds in the summertime. But in talking with right whale researchers at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and other, in the New England Aquarium and other places, there was sort of this growing idea that the way that the map data was representing that was not capturing, the reality that you have a year-round migration across this area between these two designated critical habitats. And so, back to the drawing board there, pretty simple treatment with just sending it to our graphics folks and getting some arrows drawn in there, but it really, I think communicated a lot better to the folks that we were working with. So, why, let me skip forward because I'm running a little low on time here. So these are components of the, as part of this campaign, we wanted to take what we had with map content and deliver it to the focus of our campaign a little bit more directly. And so we took what had been sort of this growing voice of communities drafting resolutions against offshore drilling and sort of wanted to visualize that in a way that, the way we'd been thinking about mapping it didn't really work. And that's just sort of, plopping your points on the coast for each city. But what happens is you get areas around like the Outer Banks where you have a lot of public lands, no one's living there, and so it looks like, if you're mapping it that way, it looks like there's not really, a voice there. So one of our designers came up with this idea to take all the names of these cities and to, spread the coast this way, and not just to do it within, a print graphic, but to use to animate that. Oh, well. Oh, that's why. We'll skip that. But the animation takes the sorry, I'm trying to get back to the presentation mode. To do that, it's already up over. Oh, I wonder if lost my connection here. Well, I will try to soldier on without images, but I think we're close to the end of the time anyways. But needless to say that graphic that was up there before, we did an animated treatment where you sort of zoom into the coast, it turns, and you're following the coastline while you're reading all the names, sort of crescendoing from a small up to this long list of names. And so, I use this as an example of cartographic process, I guess, because it's taken our our organization to another level, and that's sort of thinking about how we want to animate and communicate our maps and the data we have in our maps beyond the normal means that we do, and that's using the suite of Esri tools, which we're still very much vested in, but we want to be exploring new ways to be telling that story. So sorry about the issue with the projector, but I will conclude with that. Oh, there we go. but. I can go, if there are questions, I can take them. There's another component I could breeze through, but are there questions? No?
What would you say is your allocation of internal projects and maps for staff and inside your organization versus outside your organization?
I would say it's, I'm just going to throw this out there. I'm going to guess it's like 70-30. What happens a lot of times is, we have, the focus begins between us and an attorney, and then that process grows from helping them research the site to thinking about how we want to communicate that publicly when we're doing press. And so a lot of the maps that we're producing don't necessarily, their next stop beyond that is more around a refined message, and usually is shared back and forth with reporters that are writing the stories about these issues that we're tackling.
Any more questions?
Hi. What are some of the considerations you have for making courts that need to stand up in, or making maps that have to stand up in a court of law versus maps for reporters or maps you use internally? How's your thought process there?
That's a great question. I think the biggest challenge we have is, will it be admissible within the court? And so the role that we play with our maps is that when we're creating trial exhibits, we're usually creating something that's demonstrative and is either we're using our cartography to help communicate the complexities of a scientific analysis that an expert has done. Usually that means, a series of water sampling sites around a pollution source over time. And the purpose there is not that we're putting our analysis on the stand, but we're helping to clarify that analysis for a judge or for a congressman or whichever audience that we're focused on there. And I guess the other spectrum of that is there's always the potential that we could be called to testify on the validity of the maps that we make. We haven't had that situation yet, but I have had to file written testimony in the form of affidavits or declarations to explain the methodology behind a map, and usually it's just verification of data sources and things like that.
Okay, thank you.